Hey everybody, this is Ibarionex, and we're back to talk about photographs. I got a good topic for you guys today, but before we jump into it, I want to let you know that in the beginning or end of May, beginning of June, I am going to be attending the Focus on the Story Photography Festival that happens in DC. It's an amazing event. This is going to be its second year in which photojournalists, documentary photographers, and some street photographers gather together to talk about photography, telling stories with images. There are going to be panel discussions, workshops, photo walks, a whole assortment of things, and I'm really looking forward to attending. I'm going to be conducting a 2-day street photography course. So if you are going to, if you live or you're going to be attending this event and you want to study with me, check it out. The link will be below in the notes. Now, one of the things that I think about a lot when I'm making photographs is not just the big things like light and shadow, line and shape, color, gesture. Sometimes I'm seeing all those things, but the thing that I'm really paying attention to right before I press that button is that little something, that little detail. And sometimes it can be a small gesture. Sometimes it's the separation of two different elements within the frame so they're not overlapping. And in terms of the photograph, that probably occupies a space of just a couple of millimeters, not even an inch sometimes, but it's enough. It's enough for me to take a photograph from being really good to being exceptional. And one of the reasons I really encourage you to slow down is so that you can be observant of those small little shifts of position or gesture that really make an image transformative. And it doesn't come easy because you really have to be incredibly present and you have to pay attention to every inch of the frame. Otherwise, you're just pressing the button hoping that everything sort of comes together nicely, and that really doesn't create consistent results. So I have a couple of images here that I think really illustrate the importance of that. Okay, here we have a shot by Ken Walton. This was created with a Fujifilm X100F at 1/1600th of a second at f11 ISO 1600. Now, this is obviously a very humorous shot. You create this juxtaposition between the sailor and these jets that look like little mosquitoes or flies that are about to fly into his ear and in a comic way, probably fly through his head and come out the other side of his head. It's really sort of an amusing juxtaposition. But the reason why it works is because of timing, right? Because he has that lead plane just a couple of millimeters or inches away from the ear, so you can just anticipate that next moment when those planes will suddenly disappear from view. Had these planes been positioned, way over here, I don't think the shot would have the same impact. And if the jets were over here and it was just the contrails behind it, I don't know if the image would still have the same impact as does here because of the relatively small size of the planes. You get that impression of like mosquitoes or gnats buzzing around your ear. You get what Ken here is trying to imply with this shot. But this is a perfect example about how you sort of have to anticipate where you want different elements within the frame. If those planes had been positioned higher or lower, or they were further at the edge of the frame, the image wouldn't have the impact that it does now. And you have to know that before you make the photograph, because otherwise you'll just be blindly taking photographs. And a lot of people ask me, well, do you use the continuous drive mode of your camera when you're shooting on the street? And I can't rely on that because for me, those critical moments, I can't leave to the control of the camera. I need to anticipate exactly when I need to release the button because I know exactly where I want that thing to be. And even if I have a camera that is capable of 8 or 9 frames per second, I have found that when I have attempted that, I miss the shot because the moment that I'm looking for is in between the 2 frames that I let the camera choose for me. So it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of practice to get into that zone and be able to sort of read the camera so well that you know exactly when you have to press the button. But when you do, it really pays off incredibly. Next, we have a shot by Bjarne Erick. This was created with a Fujifilm X100T at 1/30th of a second, f2 ISO 640. Now, one of the common motifs that we revisit all the time in street photography is people walking or running through a scene. We're not just trying to get interesting characters, but we're trying to use the human figure as a graphic element within a composition. And when that's happening, when we're looking at someone moving through a scene, where we're not just looking at them as sort of an interesting looking man or woman or child, we're looking to create a relationship between them and all the other elements within the scene. And when you start looking at the human figure, you really have to pay attention to line and shape, especially when someone is running through a scene in the way that this fellow is, who's trying to catch a train or trying to get somewhere. And the moment here is really great. I mean, Bjarne here is using a very slow shutter speed to get some blur, and he's also panning the camera from left to right slightly in order to render the guy who's running really sharp. But it's the moment that he captures here, which is that really critical thing. Because if you look at the image carefully, you can see that he has this man in full stride. So his legs create this wonderful triangular shape that I'm always sort of looking for, rather than a moment where his legs are parallel to each other, where it looks like he only had one leg. This splay of the legs is often something that I'm looking for anytime I'm photographing an individual or a group of people walking through a scene. The position of the legs and the line just add a dynamic element to the shot. If the legs are ramrod straight, pointing down towards the bottom of the frame, it comes off as just being too static. But when you have this arrangement of the 2 legs, it adds a bit of energy. It suggests the movement, even when the shutter speed is really fast and you're completely freezing the action. But the added touch here that Bjarne succeeds in getting is the moment when he is basically levitating. He is in mid-stride and his left foot is in the air about to make contact with the walkway. So it's like he's gliding rather than making any sort of full contact. And you can see the full shadow of his legs and his feet immediately below him, which adds a nice flourish to this shot. And that little gap between that left foot and the walkway is what I'm talking about. I mean, this shot probably still would have been good a couple of beats later, where his foot made contact with it, because you would still have that splay of the legs, but it adds a little something more, that it looks like he's levitating, like he's floating above the walkway. And I know it's a small thing. Most people would probably not even notice it or care about it. But small things like that are sometimes the thing that I'm hoping for, that when I see it, not only am I surprised, but I'm so grateful for it. Because whether it's someone floating, across a street as they're moving through a scene, or it could be virtually anything, but those small little differences are tremendously effective in taking the shot to just another level. I mean, there's a lot to like about this shot in terms of just especially that red color, the blur, the fluorescent lights overhead, the repeating lines and shapes. But you have this contrast of this figure creating these very strong diagonal lines where everything else is sort of a lot of strong horizontal lines that are everywhere within the frame. And then you have this sort of, more angular line in shape in this guy's body conveys a lot of energy. It just really works in contrast with everything else that's in the frame. Okay, here we have a shot by John Clarke. This was shot with a Sony A9 at 250th of a second, 5.6, ISO 500. Now, this is a much more complicated photograph. There are a lot of people in boats in different elements of the frame here, but positioning and the relative positioning of each of these figures is really, really important. You have the anchor of this woman who is rowing this boat, and I just love the way her arms are positioned here. I just love this sort of the way we just navigate her hands here. We get this wonderful sort of circular view of her, and how these lines come up here and create a really strong graphic. The triangles here, the repeating triangles of her body, and the things, the paddles that she's using to row herself through the scene, are just really, really amazing. But then look at how everything else sort of complements each other. You have the other figures in the boat, but at no point do you feel like the image is cluttered. Like, one of the more obvious separations that we have is this boat over here that's really cleanly defined by the water that surrounds it. But, you can take a look at these two women that are in this boat here. And even though their boat sort of almost juxtaposed with this boat here being piloted by this woman and this boat here being piloted by this woman, each of them is very cleanly read. You can see that most of the human figures here, like her, and for the most part these two, and the people in this far boat, and this person here, are all easily read within the frame. In a couple of seconds, in a couple of minutes, this whole scene would be completely different, and there would be a lot more overlap. And the boats, the people that are piloting the boats, the relationship between the boats themselves would completely change and make it incredibly difficult to read it as cleanly as I can right now. And I talk a lot about triangles here, and part of the triangle, the implied triangle, is the way it guides our eye through the frame. And you can see it here. I mean, you can see this triangle here, but there's an inverted triangle here, right? And you can see it here in this pattern of triangles with these these oars, or these sticks, or whatever you're going to call them, that sort of repeat themselves through the frame. And it's everywhere throughout this shot, but it creates a lovely rhythm that you always kind of, you explore the frame, and as you're about to leave the frame, it guides you back here, and then you get over here, and this strong diagonal line leads you right into the frame. This is really hard stuff to get, just because there's so much that is happening, and there's so many things playing off of each other. But this is where both timing and awareness are absolutely critical. You have to not only be paying attention to what's obviously your main subject in this composition, you have to pay attention to everything else that's in the frame and where they exist within the frame. And you have to sort of you take pictures, but you are sort of aware that things may not be exactly where they need to be, and you keep making photographs, and you just observe where you anticipate they will need to be in order for the shot to work. And when that happens, you take your shot, but you keep shooting. You just don't wait for that singular moment and sort of hold your finger above at least I don't, because part of it is like I'm trying to sort of gauge my timing. And by taking photographs, I get myself into my own sort of rhythm. And as things are playing out, I'm constantly observing how everything is changing relative to each other. And when it happens, and when it happens like it does in this shot by John, it's really, really marvelous. But again, it really calls on you to slow down, to be observant, especially of the very small details that make a huge difference. All right, I hope you like that. My new book, Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow, is out. And if you like what I'm teaching you through these videos, you'll want to pick up the book because it encapsulates all the principles that I've been trying to share on this YouTube channel over the past year. And it basically gives you a workflow. It gives you a way of being able to learn how, not only how I see, but how you see. And to be able to develop a skill set and really practical ways of seeing and then using your camera, and even later when you're post-processing. These are things that I never learned when I was starting as a photographer, and I so wish I had, because I think I'd be so much ahead of the game if I'd learned that early. But, it is what it is. But if you're struggling or if you're finding it difficult to consistently make good photographs, this book will help you tremendously. I'm really confident about it. So check it out. And if you like what you read there, please let me know. And The Candid Frame is my podcast, which I've been doing for 13 years this month, I think. And we have over 454 episodes. And most recent conversation was with Stella Johnson. And Stella is amazing. I met her at the Miami Street Photography Festival last year. And she's a documentary photographer who's done extensive work in Mexico and Greece and elsewhere. But her work in Mexico is fantastic. You really have to take a look at the work, and you got to listen to the interview. And if that's your first introduction to the Candid Frame, it is the best way to sort of get jacked in to what I've been doing for all these many years, especially if you love photography. So check it out by visiting thecandidframe.com. And if you want to submit images to the Candid Frame Flickr pool, all you need to do is go to the Candid Frame Flickr pool on your computer and ask to be added. Don't try it on your tablet or phone because you'll get a message that it's a private group and you can't be added, blah, blah, blah. You have to do it through your computer. And once you do that, I'll approve you and you can submit images to the community. And if you like this video, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.